We're going to start off with a quick review of everything we've talked about. But science confirms creation over and over and over and over and over again. And the more I learn, the more obvious it is. Okay? We started out talking about what is going on here with evolution in millions of years, and it's the Genesis 3 attack. It's you question the authority of God, which is, did God really say he created everything in 6 days? That's what's under attack. And then there's a lie created, just like in Genesis 3. Okay, the lie is millions of years and evolution, and then they say there's no evidence for a global flood. Well, there's amazing evidence for a global catastrophic flood. That is the fossil record. That's what it shows. Okay, so creation and the flood are under attack. The geologic column right here that we see in textbooks all the time, this is the order of burial. Okay, it is not the order of things evolving, because these index fossils that you see in these layers are actually throughout the layers. Okay, it's not like these creatures only are here. These creatures are also up here. Okay, so the geologic column actually shows a burial order, and we talked about those megasequences, the 6 megasequences that creation scientists are doing real observable science, drilling cores, and they're finding these sequences all over the entire continents, which is what you would expect to find. And remember, it was like a wave. The flood was a wave of like 6 different times of inundating the earth. Okay? And it lines up perfectly with this. Okay, the fossil record should show, if evolution were true, it would show the picture on the left, the tree of life that everyone is brainwashed into believing. Okay, this right here. This is nothing like the fossil record. The fossil record shows this, created kinds, every kind created perfectly and then differentiating perfectly, right? You have a dog kind, cat kind. That is what the real evidence shows in the fossil record. That is what the evidence also shows in the cellular level, the DNA level. It also shows this. This is not anything. This is a made-up story, okay? To go from a single cell, we talked about that last week, how that in and of itself is impossible. But think about going from a single cell to every single thing we have. Plants, animals, insects, sea creatures, everything that has DNA in it came from one single cell. That's what we're taught. That's what we're supposed to believe. The more and more I study about this, the more and more impossible that absolutely is. Okay, radiometric dating. We discussed this. We take fossils of known age, things that not even fossils, but you take things of known age. Remember, like the snail that was still alive? They radiometrically dated it. It was 27,000 years old. Or they find a skull of a human. They date it, and it's 45,000 years old, and they realize the man died in the 1700s. I mean, all of these things to try to validate the method. Mount St. Helens, they know when it erupted. Other volcanoes in the past that they know when it erupted, they know the date of these things. And they cannot validate the method for carbon-14 or for other methods like potassium argon. All of the radiometric dating does not get validated at all. The origin of life, we talked about this last year, that one single cell is more complex than any machine man has ever made. The complexity, they don't even know the complexity of the one simple cell. It's just getting more and more complex the more they study it. Okay, no one has been able to create even one small biological protein, not one. Even though it'll say that they've created life in the lab. The media says this, the textbooks say this, but that's not true. They have not created even one protein. We talked about that last week. If you give a scientist all the things needed for a cell, like the cell membrane, all of the pieces and parts of it, they can't take all of those pieces and create a cell that's living. They can't do it. They never have done it. Okay? No one is able to account through observable science how life even began. And that's where evolution has to start. Okay? We talked about the oxygen and water problem. Remember how oxygen and water, you can't have oxygen or water at the origin of life, but you have to have it. It's a big problem for the origin of the first cell. Okay? Evolution is not true. Okay? We have to get that out of our mind, that they've proven it. They have not proven. Okay? Origin of life. Remember James Tour, if you want some chemistry to back it up, go look up Dr. James Tour. He's got amazing videos about the chemistry of it that he can go into. Okay? Information rather than chemistry is the main problem for the origin of life. Even the simplest imagined life would have enormous information content, and that's what we're talking about today. Okay, information. So here's the story. Millions of years of random mutations goes to natural selection, happens, and then magically you get new species. Plants, animals, insects, sea creatures, anything that has DNA in it magically appears. Okay, that is the story. Okay, Darwin's theory of evolution. Natural forces without any purpose or anticipation of future possibilities has the power to choose via natural selection. Okay, this is the story we're taught. Okay, the part about anticipation of future possibilities is because they're saying that natural selection, you have a creature and the creature somehow gets selected for because it knows it's going to need a fully functioning eyeball in the future. So it starts out with this thing that's not a fully functioning eye, but it's going to get there someday. And it's just piecemealed to get to the eyeball or to get to a lung or any kind of complex structure in our bodies. Okay, natural selection doesn't know what it's trying to go for. Okay. By attributing the power to choose to unintelligent natural forces, the theory of evolution has perpetuated the greatest intellectual lie in history. We're going to be talking about that today. Nature does not have the power to choose. You guys, nature can't choose anything. It's nature. There's no such thing as natural selection. Nature can't select anything. Okay, so keep that in your mind while we're talking about these things. Evolution, this is the theory, the slow changes that occur over time caused by mutations and natural selection in an interbreeding population collectively are called evolution. Mutations and natural selection, those are the two things that evolution absolutely relies on. Okay, we're going to talk about both of those. So today we're talking about natural selection, mutations, information, and what that is, genetics, and then continuous environmental tracking, which is a new way of thinking about how creatures react to their environment. Okay, evolution requires a mechanism to account for all the diversity of life. And the only thing that they can come up with, now this is the theory that they came up with before they knew what the cell looked like, before they knew anything about DNA. Okay, give it enough time, right? Natural selection and time, lots and lots of time, millions and billions of years. That is the way evolution supposedly works. Okay, we cannot comprehend that amount of time. But it doesn't matter how much time you're given, these things cannot scientifically happen. Okay, the individual organisms who happen to be best suited to an environment survive and reproduce most successfully, producing many similarly well-adapted descendants. This is natural selection. That's what it means. Survival of the fittest. It's also known as survival of the fittest. The fittest in creatures survive to reproduce. That's their theory. Okay? Supposedly, nature will filter out the individuals that are not suited for that environment. Nature somehow selects for them. Okay, again, nature cannot select anything. Okay, natural selection can only, and I put select in quotes, because it's not really selecting anything. We'll get into that today. From information that already exists. Okay. This is a diagram just straight out of a textbook. And in the first part, it's talking about survival of the fittest. So you have a green worm and a purple worm. Okay. This is what children are taught, and we were all taught. Natural selection is the mechanism of evolution. It ensures that only the traits that help a species survive and reproduce get passed on to future generations. So they start out by saying survival of the fittest. It's a competition between these two creatures, individual organisms. Okay? Natural selection is survival of the fittest on a larger scale. It involves entire populations of things. Okay? So here all the purple worms are being selected out, and then at the end, evolution is a consequence of natural selection over thousands of years. So somehow or another you end up with just green worms. What did you have at the beginning? Worms, green and purple ones. What do you have at the end? Worms, just the green ones. Okay? There's no evolution here at all. Nothing's happening. There's no evolution. Worms are worms are worms. Okay, that's all there is. But this deceives children into believing that things can change. Okay, Darwin's finches, that's the iconic thing of evolution. Well, Darwin's finches shows evolution. You had birds changing beak shape into other birds. So do you think the birds originally had the information to have different shapes of beaks according to the environment they're in? Absolutely. God is a master engineer. He engineered birds so that according to whatever environment they're in, they can eat. So their beak shape can change. It does not take millions of years for their beak shape to change. They've done these studies where they'll look at birds in a population where the birds are out in the wild kind of thing, and then they take them and they put them where they're eating human food, and their beak shape will change because they're going through and they're eating the human food, which is softer, so they don't need it. Their beak shape will change within a generation, not millions of years. And they never change into anything but birds. They're just birds. Okay, there's no evolution happening. Darwin's finches doesn't show anything except there's something inside of birds that can change their beak shape. It's pre-programmed into them. Okay, peppered moths. This is another classic example. These black moths changed into white moths back in the day. Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you because we talked about all the fraud involved in this evolution. This was actually a fraud, okay? These moths were not found on trees. They don't live on the trunks of trees. They pinned them in, and then they took pictures of them. Okay, they pinned them onto the trees. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that they're trying to convince people that evolution is happening. They're moths. They're pre-programmed to be black or white. They're peppered moths. There's no evolution here. But yet in textbooks, even in the college level, this is in textbooks, that peppered moths are proving evolution. Okay, this is kind of a generic schematic of how genetics work. Answers in Genesis uses this, so I grabbed the picture. So at the top you have these, let's pretend this is the original wolf kind, super simplified. You have LS, long hair, short hair, long hair, short hair. So God pre-programmed into the wolf all the different information it needs to be all the different kinds of dogs we have. Okay, we're going to talk about just long hair and short hair. So these guys get together and have some kids. They can have one of the S's from dad and one S from mom. So this guy has 2 short hair genes. He's a short-haired dog. Okay, this one can get an L from dad, an S from mom, so now he's got medium fur length. This guy gets the long hair from mom and dad, so he has long hair. And he meets up with somebody that has long hair also, okay? That's basically the way genetics works. Okay, so these two guys have some children, and they all have long hair. Do you see they've lost the information to have short hair? They no longer have it. Those dogs do not have any short hair genes in their line. They can never have short hair again. That's basic genetics. Okay, keep that in mind. They have lost the information to have long hair. Now, if these two over here on the right, if he found a girl that has two S's, they would only have short hair, always. Okay? So, our first video.
Lots of people say there's no evidence for God. Well, we're going to knock that one out in 3. I'm just going to have to keep it simple, throw in the old 1-2 combo, get in and out real quick, and let you fine folks chat all about it, okay? Punch 1 I'm going to call the info uppercut. When's the last time you walked into a library and asked, hey, where are all the books that have been written by mindless products of natural laws? The librarian would probably laugh at you and tell you that no such books exist. And they don't exist because they can't exist. Why not? Because first of all, it's just common sense. The words that form the message in books always originate from a person with a brain. Or to say it a bit more scientifically, the message of the book, the purpose, comes to be understood by the orderly placement of the words, design, and information. Information. Now, anytime we find info, these basic laws always apply. Number 1, matter doesn't spontaneously produce information. Number 2, only a mental source, intelligence, can generate new creative information. In other words, just like those books that couldn't originate without a mind, neither could life. Why not, you ask? Because we know that DNA contains information. Therefore, the laws of information science apply, which means the information in DNA couldn't have spontaneously generated, and that a mind is behind the information. Period. No exceptions. Look at it this way. The simplest life form we know of is an amoeba, and it contains as much information in its DNA as 1,000 complete sets of Encyclopedia Britannica. So, are we to believe that there's no way a message in a library book could spontaneously generate, but far more complicated messages in DNA that contain 1,000 times more information could have? Not likely. You see, when it comes to life or anything else that contains information, the laws of information science confirm the necessity of a creative mind. And guess what? In the very first book of the Bible, it just happens to mention that. In the beginning, God created. Bam. Uppercut lands on the chin. And now here comes the indefensible head blow. We'll call this the Nada Big Bang Bing swing, the KO to the claim that there's no evidence of God, the law of causality, left hook at doom. It goes like this. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. Now, either something caused the universe to come into existence, or nothing caused it. I might not be the smartest guy behind the telescope, but honest, practical, everyday thinking's going to lead me to the former. You have to work pretty hard to conjure up a way that nothing did it. You see, it's pretty improbable, nigh impossible, to account for design, information, and cause if the universe just exploded from nothing. Smack. And while we're on the topic, where did the matter come from that exploded? Are we really to believe that there was nothing and then it exploded, and now the exploded nothing is something, and we just happen to be smart enough to discover and understand the very laws that prove the opposite? And if the general understanding of the law of cause and effect is true, how can matter come from a lesser cause like nothing? I mean, come on. I don't have a bunch of letters after my name, but even a monkey knows better. And yeah, I snuck in a couple of extra jabs in there, so sue me. Now for some parting words from our sponsor, the Bible. It tells us in Romans 1:20 that since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse. It also says that people actually know the truth, but they reject it, which explains why even though there's overwhelming evidence that there is a God, evidence won't convince the unwilling. Sad but true. So there you have it. With just a couple of meaningful blows, the claim that there is no evidence for God is down for the count, mi amigos. In other words, it's been debunked. Adios.
So information theory is what we're going to spend a little bit of time on. This theory, they actually spent a lot of time trying to even come up with a definition of what information is. And so information has to have these 3 things: a symbolic code system, language, and meaning. That is what information is. There is no known law of nature, no known process, and no known sequence of events which can cause information to originate by itself in matter. And remember, evolution absolutely requires that the origin of the first cell has information in it, because that information is DNA. Okay, DNA is an information code. Now I want to point out that this is from 1989. This is quite a few years ago. And this is kind of before they've even discovered epigenetics, which is what we're going to talk about, which is DNA is more complex now than what they thought it was in 1989. Okay, DNA is an information code. The overwhelming conclusion is that information does not and cannot arise spontaneously by mechanistic processes. Intelligence is a necessity in the origin of any informational code, including the genetic code. No matter how much time is given, that's information. Okay, so here's DNA. It might not look like information, but we all have chromosomes. We have 46 chromosomes in us, 23 from mom and 23 from dad, and they know it's a double helix, and now they're figuring out, well, they actually already figured it out, that there's these chemicals in here, A, T, G, and C, okay, which are the chemicals that I showed you last week, how they kind of can hook together. Okay, that's what they were trying to create in the lab, are these chemicals hooked together. Okay, that is an information code. We just call it A, T, G, and C. And A and T always hook together because it's a double helix. So how does it hook? You have the adenine here, the thymine here, and they can hook together chemically. A and T are always together because of the chemistry. G and C are always together because of the chemistry. Okay, you can't have A hooking on to G. Okay, it doesn't work like that. So you have 4 letters, but only 2 can hook on, and then another 2 can hook on. Incredibly complex. This is just what we know today. Okay, the English language, let's compare it to the genetic language to show that this is an information code. We have 26 letters in our language to be able to speak and communicate. DNA only has the 4. That's it. So you would think that it would be harder to communicate with just 4 than 26. Letters, the 26 letters form the words. These nucleotides form the amino acids. Now it's the amino acids that they were trying to form in the lab. Remember they formed right and left-handed amino acids? That only the left ones are used in life, only left-handed ones. So not only is there the specific amino acids, it's the specific kind of amino acid that is used to make proteins. Okay, so letters form words, words form our sentences, the amino acids form proteins. So think of the proteins as sentences, okay? And then the sentences give information. You're reading a book, you read the whole book, you get a lot of sentences, it gives you the information. These proteins are building and maintaining the cells. Everything is based on proteins that are made from amino acids. Okay, so do mutations add new genetic information? Natural selection and mutations. That is what evolution absolutely must have. Okay, mutations can be a lot of different things. You can substitute a nucleotide, you can delete a nucleotide, you can insert some that aren't supposed to be there, you can do what's called a frame shift where it starts reading the protein at a wrong spot, okay? Or you can have a repeated sequence. But these ones in orange, like here's substitution, instead of an A, it accidentally made a G. But we have these things in our DNA that they're like proofreaders. They go along and they're like, oh, you spelled that wrong. We got to change that G back to an A, and it'll change it. Sometimes it doesn't. But a point mutation like this, 1 point mutation, you're not going to see. It's not going to affect the creature at all. So we can handle a bunch of point mutations. We all have mutations passed on from us, from our parents who had mutations. We have mutations, I pass those on to my kids. Okay, so the mutations are actually building up in us. Our mutations are. These repeated ones, it's this one, and then it repeats the whole thing again accidentally. There's no new information there. It's just like reading, when you're reading a book and the proofreader didn't catch it, and it has the same word twice. There's no new information there, or even the same sentence twice. There's no new information. It's not giving you any new information. Okay? So that's how mutations work. So antibiotic resistance, this is a great example that they use to try to prove that evolution happens, because these bacteria can change. They change into other kinds of bacteria. Okay, so you have this little normal bacteria, H. pylori, and he causes stomach ulcers. You take an antibiotic, he has an enzyme in him, the little bacteria has an enzyme that converts that antibiotic to a poison. Because you don't want to poison your cells. You don't have that particular enzyme, so your body cells don't convert it into a poison. This guy does, and he dies. Okay? Excuse me. There's a mutation that causes a loss of information. Just like those long-haired dogs have lost the information to have short hair, this guy does not have the information, the mutant, to produce the enzyme. He doesn't have it. He has no enzyme in him. So when you give him the antibiotics, he just laughs at it. He doesn't care. Just like your body cells. Okay? So they continue to reproduce and make you sick. So you have to do a different antibiotic. This is nothing more than a loss of information. There's a loss of information here. I'm going to drill that home to you guys, okay? There is no new information. This guy is still a bacteria. Okay, here's some more mutations. This dog does not have the genetic information to have a normal dog snout anymore. This one doesn't have the information to have normal long dog legs. Okay, these guys are my favorite, and they have lost the genetic information to shed their hair. Okay, people breed these things. These would never survive. None of these creatures would survive in the wild. Okay, they're not intended to do that. They've lost the information. A normal dog should be able to shed their hair. It's just normal. Okay, well, they've lost that genetic information. That's what mutations do. There's a mutation that mutates this thing called myostatin, which controls muscle growth. Okay, so it's deactivating it. The gene, it gets completely deactivated. So there's a loss of genetic information there. Okay, those muscles continue to grow uncontrollably. There's huge problems with fertility, so these things would not reproduce on their own. And delivery of the babies, huge problem, right? Here's an example, the Belgian blue. They're also called double-muscled. There's double-muscled pigs you can find pictures of, but it's because there's a mutation in the gene that causes this. It's a loss of information. That myostatin gene cannot work properly. They've lost the information. There's no gain of information. Okay? Not even one mutation has been observed that adds a little information to the genome. All point mutations that have been studied on the molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information and not to increase it. This is the geological timescale again that I'm going to show you, okay? Because this is what's been drilled into our heads. What's never mentioned here is that in order for this to happen, you have to have new information. Requires new information to go from these supposedly simple creatures. They're not simple. They're just different than us. Okay? To get bigger and bigger. That's the deception. You have to have more information to go from a single cell. Okay? That's what I want you guys to get. This never happens. It never happens. Okay, here's a great, I love Answers in Genesis. They have these cartoons. Natural selection is downhill. Okay, it's a loss of information. Evolution requires it to go uphill. It doesn't ever go uphill. But they're not going to change their theory, even though all of the evidence is showing this. Okay, the evolutionary view. Remember, you start with nothing? You start with nothing. No information. Nothing. Right? Even in astronomy, as we're going to see next week, the Big Bang starts with nothing. But you guys aren't smart enough to know how nothing can turn into everything using quantum mechanics, right? We don't know what quantum mechanics is. Okay? So it starts with nothing. You have the first life magically appear somehow. And there's an increase of information over time using lots of mutations. This is their theory. What do mutations show? A loss of information, not a gain of information. And then you have all this information at the bottom, meaning all the different creatures, all the DNA in us. Okay, start with nothing, you end up with all of the information in us. The creation view, God created everything with all the information necessary for life in every single different kind of creature that there is. Plants included. Plants have DNA just like we do. All the different kinds of plants. Okay? So you have these species. There's a degradation over time because of the fall, because of mutations. Okay, the fall of man, it affected us to our core. Our DNA was affected. Okay? The little telomeres on the end of your DNA are these little repeating AT, 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 AT. As you age, they start to degrade. That's the aging process. Okay, that's because of the fall. We were created, our DNA was created to live forever. What does the Bible say? That God created us to live forever. And then the fall, it affected even our DNA. Okay, sin affected even our DNA. And then we have, at the bottom, all kinds of different species. Okay, but it's a loss of information, not a gain. So right here, the evolutionary theory, in millions of years, they should throw out their theory because that's not what the evidence shows. But they won't let it go. They will not let it go. The human genome, when they started to sequence it, when I was in school, they hadn't sequenced it yet. Now they've sequenced it. It is getting more and more complex the more they know about it. The more they know, the more they realize they don't know anything. Because when I was in school, it was one gene makes one protein. So a gene is like the sequence, the specific sequence of A, T, G, C, that would make one individual protein. And that was it. They're trying to simplify it. Well, now they know it's not one gene, one protein. It's not even anywhere close to that. One gene can be lots of different things. And that's where epigenetics comes into play. Okay, here's a great video. Now this video is a reconstruction of DNA being replicated. Each one of these different colored things that you're going to see, like there's a blue thing, a darker blue, green, all of those different things are individual proteins. They're protein machines that are working on DNA. Okay, DNA is a double helix. So it's twisted, like pretend like there's two ropes twisted together. If you take the ends of the two ropes and you start undoing it like this, it's going to coil in on itself and break further down the rope, right? Just picture that in your head. So in order to copy DNA, you have to pull it apart to copy it, but you have to prevent it from getting into a tangled mess down the road. So a master engineer designed all of these different molecules to help with that. It cuts the DNA at a particular place while it's being copied, splices it back together, and moves on down the road. At incredible speeds, this happens. So here's a simulation of this going on.
Using computer animation based on molecular research, we are now able to see how DNA is actually copied in living cells. You are looking at an assembly line of amazing miniature biochemical machines that are pulling apart the DNA double helix and cranking out a copy of each strand. The DNA to be copied enters the production line from bottom left. The whirling blue molecular machine is called helicase. It spins the DNA as fast as a jet engine as it unwinds the double helix into 2 strands. One strand is copied continuously and can be seen spooling off to the right. Things are not so simple for the other strand because it must be copied backwards. It is drawn out repeatedly in loops and copied one section at a time. The end result is 2 new DNA molecules.
Isn't that incredible? That's just absolutely incredible. So you have to realize that each one of those proteins was made from DNA. And DNA needs proteins to get copied, right? So epigenetics is like the light switch to turn genes on and off, okay? This is kind of the new, remember they used to think that it was a one gene, one protein. Now they're realizing that there's a whole nother layer of complexity onto it, and they call that epigenetics, okay? So it's like a light switch that turns the genes on and off at certain times, under certain conditions. Okay, basic genetics. The information in DNA determines the order of the amino acids. Those are the little amino acids that are making the proteins. Okay, it determines the protein structure because a protein is made, all these amino acids, but then it has to fold in a particular way so it has some function. Okay, they're not just a straight line of amino acids making a protein. They are all folded up in a certain way. It determines the protein's function. What is this protein going to do? And it determines when the genes are turned on and off. Okay, just think about that. When you are being created in the womb, you have to make 2 eyes, not 3, 1 nose, not 2, right? So these genes that are creating all of the pieces and parts of us have to know when to turn on and when to turn off. You only need to make an arm twice, and then those genes need to turn off. Okay, every single cell in your body has all the DNA to make all these different things. But they're not going to be turned on as an adult to make another arm suddenly, okay? DNA cannot be converted into protein without having proteins in the first place. It can't. So this is the classic chicken and egg problem. Which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Chicken comes first in the dictionary. Okay, so epigenetics deals with changes in the gene expression, which is when the genes get turned on and off. It's not from mutations. Okay, because mutations change your DNA. Epigenetic changes are reversible. They don't change your DNA sequence. It changes how your body reads that sequence. And this is the whole nother top layer of DNA and genetics that they're discovering. And I guess in another 10, 20 years, 50 years, they're going to discover another layer of complexity. Okay, genetics loads the weapon. Think of it that way. Your DNA is loading the weapon. Your epigenetics is pulling the trigger. Think of it that way. Okay? Here's another video on DNA.
Did you know that the DNA code is itself governed by another code known as the epigenetic code? This physical and chemical code determines which genes are switched on. Changes in this code can greatly alter an organism without altering one letter of its DNA. For instance, scientists have managed to change the coat color in mice by feeding them a diet that switches off certain genes. epigenetics poses new problems for evolution. For instance, a group of animals with a camouflaged coat colour might be favoured in a particular environment, but if this coat colour is due to epigenetics and not the actual DNA code, then the non-camouflaged animals would be selected against in vain. When the epigenetic modification is reset by a diet change, natural selection is sent back to square one. The field of epigenetics therefore creates problems for evolution and strongly points to a master programmer who invented the DNA and epigenetic codes.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Okay, Dr. Randy Galuza, he is the head of Institute for Creation Research. He is at the forefront of this research, and he calls it continuous environmental tracking. And it's very exciting because this is kind of the piece we've been waiting for to flatten or debunk, whatever you want to call it, natural selection causing evolution. Is it working now? Okay. The evidence today supports a design-based, organism-focused model called continuous environmental tracking that is centered on the innate capabilities of organisms to actively track environmental changes with sensors. He's calling them sensors. He was an engineer, and then he went to medical school, and so with that engineer brain, he's looking at the human body saying, it is engineered. Everything is engineered. Okay, an intelligent, supremely intelligent engineer designed everything. Okay, this model honors Jesus and God as the master engineer. Okay, continuous environmental tracking. Creatures are using sensors in them to read the environment and adjust accordingly because they're active problem solvings. So the environment isn't acting on the creature is sensing the environment and changing accordingly, like the, Darwin's finches. Okay, the environment was not changing that creature. The creature has a sensor in it, pre-programmed in it, to change if their food source changes. Okay, this is the opposite of evolution idea that the environment actively forms or molds these passive creatures. It's not the environment creating the creatures. The creatures are sensing their environment and changing because they're pre-programmed to be able to change. Okay? This is a great example. If you put your cruise control on your car, your accelerator when you get to a hill is going to go down, right? You don't have to do that because there's a sensor in it. It's designed with a sensor to sense the hills and to keep the accelerator going at 60 miles an hour or whatever you set it to, okay? So this is pre-programmed information into the car to adjust. It's not the hill causing the car. It is something pre-programmed into the car by a sensor so that when it comes upon a hill, it can change, okay? The hill is not the cause, just like the environment is not the cause of creatures changing, okay? Creatures continuously track environmental changes using the same key elements man-made tracking systems use: sensors, logic, algorithms, and response mechanisms. Those three things. Now, this guy is an engineer, so he knows how things work, okay? And now he's studying the genetics and creatures. Instead of being passive objects molded by the environment, living creatures have sensors pre-programmed into them that detect changed conditions, solve challenges, and fill new environments within their lifetime. And then they pass that on to their offsprings. What was our command? Go and fill the earth. Well, I think animals probably also had that mandate, to go and fill the earth. Well, you can't fill the earth. God doesn't ask you to do something that you can't do. Creatures can't fill the earth if they are pigeonholed into this environment. What if it gets a little cold? Okay, they'll die. Well, no, God has pre-programmed them to sense their environment and then change. That's the epigenetic part. The epigenetics changes. Their DNA doesn't change. Their epigenetics changes. When are these genes turned on and off? Okay, that is key. Continuous environmental tracking, there's fast changes. One generation, creatures can change, and even in 24 hours, creatures can change. Okay, here's some examples. The pike is on the left, and then there's a carp on the right. Now, the pike will eat the carp. When the pike eats the carp fish, when the pike is eating it and dissolving it and digesting it, right, it exudes pieces of carp out. Okay, the carp detects it immediately and then changes its shape. Okay, so the carp, the school of carp are like, oh gosh, Uncle Bob just got eaten. Quick, change your shape. Let's swim away fast. Because the pike is there and it's going to get eaten. So the fish change their shape so they can swim faster, they can turn faster, and they can get away from the pike. Okay. The top picture is a normal carp, and the bottom picture is the carp that has changed shape, because they have a sensor specific to those chemicals that are exuded from the pike that just ate Uncle Bob. So he knows he's got to change shapes or he's going to get eaten too. Okay? They change body size and shape after being exposed to pike that just ate the carp. They actually, in the experiment, they dissolved the skin of carp and they put it in the pond or whatever they were using for their experiment, and the carp changed shape because of the dissolved skin. Crazy, right? This is sensor-induced self-adjustment. Okay, the evolutionists will say that the environment that has pike in it changes the carp's shape. That's not true. The carp senses the chemicals and changes. Okay, blind cavefish. This is a classic example of over millions of years, these fish got stuck in a cave somehow and they didn't need sight, so therefore they lost their ability to see. Okay, these can happen in a single generation. Fish are great to study because they can reproduce quickly. You can do it in a lab. Okay, these changes can happen in one generation, not over millions of years. Okay. Continuous environmental tracking. A creature's ability to adapt is not from external sources, the environment. It's from internal sources, pre-programmed by God. That's the main thing that I want you guys to know. Natural selection is out. Okay? The scientific community needs to get on it and start figuring out what these sensors are. Because it's the sensors that are important, not the environment. Everything was created after its kind with the ability to vary within the kind. And this is why the creationist researchers have discovered this. Because we know that we were designed, and every creature was designed with the ability to change. That's not the evolutionary story. They would never have found this in their thinking, their research. They would have never found it. Okay, so in conclusion, natural selection, all of the external factors like the environment, mutations, natural selection, random chance, they just happen to do this, that does not work. Science does not show that at all. And especially now that they know how DNA, they know more about how DNA works with that epigenetic layer, turning genes on and off, doesn't work. Okay, natural selection is false. Nature is mindless. It cannot select. So that whole phrase, natural selection, is a farce. Okay, nature cannot select anything. All right, there's no mechanism for adding new information for evolution to occur. You have a single cell, it has to figure out how to make more things. You have to figure out how to make all the different systems, your respiratory system, your sight, everything. You have to figure that out. Okay, mutations do not add new genetic information. I don't know why mutations in natural selection are still being taught and told that this is how evolution happens, when just the opposite has been proven in genetics. It's proven mutations do not add more information, and you have to have more information to go from a single cell to everything. Okay? Continuous environmental tracking. Internal factors like sensors, okay, and God gets the glory, right? We know that God created everything because we can see it in DNA. It is a masterful, engineered program is what DNA is. They don't even know. The smartest people in the world don't have a clue about how this code works, okay? It is an unbelievable code. In Psalms, for you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. It's very interesting that they use the term knit together because that's the way our DNA kind of looks like. Looks like it's being knit together. Like if you're knitting something, DNA. You know, science over and over and over confirms creation. So I have one more short video, just because I think it's important to have one more little piece of evidence. Next week, we're moving on to astronomy. This is on population growth. And if we have been around for millions of years, our population would be much greater than it is. And so this video is a good example of how that works. So I want you to see it.
In 2011, the world's human population reached 7 billion. How long did it take for this many humans to be born? Well, humans reproduce at a rate of around 0.4%, sometimes spiking as high as 2% or as low as 0.1%. If we calculate backward using only 0.1%, then it would only take 7,062 years to reach today's population. But what about the evolutionary scenario? It says that the first humans evolved over 2 million years ago, and that this group numbered around 10,000. If we calculate forward using the lowest historical rate of reproduction, then humans should have reached 7 billion people a long time ago. How do evolutionists answer this problem? They claim that the early human population had virtually no population growth for over 2.4 million years. Supposedly, the lack of agriculture slowed down mankind's reproduction. But let's think about that for a minute. Humans have always used agriculture. The earliest human remains and writings show evidence of agriculture. So how do humans have virtually no population growth for millions of years? Also, eons of people living on our planet would generate big piles of discarded and buried bones and many layers of their debris packed on cave floors. But the evidence is completely absent. How could the human population only recently reach 7 billion? Why not several 100,000 years ago, soon after man supposedly first evolved? We just surpassed 7 billion because humanity has been around for only thousands of years, not millions. The 2.4 million years of evolutionary history with no population growth never actually happened. The current world population precisely aligns with biblical history. No added stories needed.
Pretty interesting, right? Even our population shows that we've only been here for 7,000 years is what that said, right? Biblical timeline. Okay, so now we can take questions and